a man who lost everything, a soldier who buried his heart beneath the ashes of war. For years he spoke to no one, except his loyal dog, Max, until one foggy morning, a little girl fell into an old well. When he pulled her out, she looked at him with trembling eyes and said, "You need a wife, and I need a dad." That single moment changed his life forever. From loneliness to love, from silence to faith, this is the story of how God's quiet miracle found its way into a broken man's heart. If you believe that miracles still happen, even in the darkest valleys, hit subscribe, give this video a like, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you for keeping faith alive. The Montana Valley lay beneath a heavy curtain of mist, the kind that muffled sound and blurred the edges of everything it touched. Pines rose like dark spears from the hillsides, their branches wet with the ghost of last night's rain. The dirt road that cut through the lowlands was nothing more than a ribbon of mud and frost, twisting past empty cabins and fields gone to seed. It was the first chill of October, and even the horses breathed in clouds. Somewhere far off, a raven called, its cry swallowed by the fog. John Miller rode slowly through that gray silence, his broad frame hunched in the saddle of a weather-worn bay horse. He was a man built like the land itself, tall, hard-edged, and scarred by time. His coat, once black, was faded to the color of dust. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed a face carved by wind and loss. A streak of gray ran through his dark beard, and the deep lines at the corners of his eyes told stories he never spoke aloud. At 45, John had the look of someone who'd fought too many battles, some with men, most with himself. His hands, wrapped in cracked leather gloves, were the kind that knew work and grief in equal measure. Beside him trotted Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat of sable and silver, thick and slightly unkempt. His amber eyes scanned the brush with an intelligence that mirrored his master's, a quiet, watchful alertness. Max had been John's only companion since the day he found him as a pup, hiding beneath a collapsed wagon near the battlefield ruins years ago. Loyal, calm, and fiercely protective, the dog rarely barked. He simply moved as if he already understood what was coming before anyone else did. The trail led toward the ridges east of town, where the land opened to forgotten fields and abandoned wells from the mining days. John rarely rode this way, unless he needed solitude. And solitude was what he craved more than food or fire. He avoided the townsfolk of Bridger's Hollow, who whispered about the giant up on Miller Ridge. They didn't mean it cruelly, but they feared him anyway. It wasn't just his size. It was the silence that came with him. Years ago, he'd been known as Sergeant John Miller, a cavalry scout during the border wars. He'd seen enough blood to drown the color out of his world. After a failed rescue mission that took the lives of his brother and 4 good men, John left the army and withdrew from everyone he knew. The guilt never left. It just turned quiet. Like him. As he guided the horse along a ridge path, the world felt frozen in breathless stillness, until Max stopped. The dog's ears pricked forward, tail stiff, eyes fixed on something down the slope. Then came a sound, a small, trembling cry. Not the cry of an animal, but of a child. John straightened, scanning the fog. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice low and rough, more like gravel than speech. He dismounted, boots sinking into damp earth, and followed the sound. Another cry echoed, faint but desperate. Max bounded ahead, nose to the ground, weaving through brush until he stopped near a collapsed wooden frame surrounded by tall grass. John pushed through and saw it. A dry well, its old cover splintered, one half rotted away. "Damn," he muttered, kneeling beside it. The hole descended into darkness, but somewhere below, a tiny voice whimpered. "Hello?" His tone was firm but gentle. "Can you hear me?" A moment's silence, then a fragile answer floated up. "Help. Please." John's pulse steadied, not quickened. The soldier in him took over. He grabbed the coiled rope from his saddle, looped it around a nearby stump, and tossed the end into the well. "Take hold of the rope. Wrap it around your arms." There was hesitation below, then the faint sound of hands scraping against rock. The rope went taut. John leaned back, bracing his weight, and began to pull. Max paced nearby, whining softly. The ground was slick, and twice he had to reset his footing, his arms straining with slow precision. Inch by inch, the rope rose until a pair of small, mud-streaked hands appeared at the rim. Then, a face. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Thin, cheeks streaked with dirt, curls of chestnut hair clinging to her forehead. Her dress, once white, was torn and stained brown with earth. Her knees were scraped, her palms bleeding, but her eyes, bright hazel, defiant despite the fear, met his without flinching. John reached down and lifted her free, setting her gently on the grass. She coughed hard, trying to catch her breath. Max approached cautiously, sniffing her fingers, tail wagging once. The girl blinked, staring up at the man and the enormous dog. He looked even larger up close, over 6 feet tall, shoulders broad beneath the worn coat, a scar running from temple to jaw. His expression was unreadable, as if carved from the same stone he knelt on. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "What's your name?" "Anna," she whispered, rubbing her sore hands together. "Anna. Where's your family, Anna?" She looked toward the trees, lips trembling. "Mama's looking for water. I fell when she wasn't watching." Her voice cracked, halfway between apology and fear. John nodded, his face softening almost imperceptibly. "You're lucky the well's gone dry. Come on, we'll find her." As he stood, Anna tilted her head, studying him. Then, in the smallest, bravest voice, "You're really big, mister, but I'm not scared." The words hit harder than any bullet ever could. John froze. For years, he'd grown used to the way people stepped aside when he entered town, the way mothers pulled their children closer. But this little girl, covered in mud and trembling, looked at him like he was something safe. Max leaned closer, pressing his nose to Anna's hand, and for the first time in a long time, John felt warmth stir in his chest. He almost smiled. Almost. "Let's go find your mother," he said, lifting her onto his horse. She sat sideways, clutching the saddle horn, while Max trotted alongside. They followed the trail west, where fog began to lift and sunlight broke through in thin, golden bands. After a few minutes, John spotted movement near the creek. A woman, her skirt torn at the hem, calling a name into the mist. "Anna!" The girl's face lit up. "Mama!" she cried, waving both arms. The woman turned, and relief washed over her features like a storm passing. She ran toward them, stumbling over roots, tears streaming down her face. She was Sarah Jennings, perhaps in her early 30s, tall and slender but strong, with sun-browned skin and light brown hair pinned loosely beneath a worn scarf. Her eyes were the pale blue of river ice, sharp yet filled with worry. The long days of travel had left shadows beneath them. She wore a faded green dress and a dark shawl, both dirt-streaked from the road. John stopped the horse, helping Anna down. The child sprinted to her mother, who dropped to her knees and crushed her daughter against her chest. "Oh, my sweet girl. I thought I'd lost you." Sarah looked up, noticing John for the first time, the towering figure, the weathered coat, the silent dog beside him. For a heartbeat, fear flashed in her eyes, but then Anna turned and said brightly, "Mama, this is Mr. John. He and Max saved me." The woman's shoulders eased. She rose slowly, brushing her hair from her face. "Thank you," she said softly, voice hoarse but sincere. I don't know how to repay you." "No need," John replied, eyes shifting toward the horizon. "Just be careful where you walk. That well's been forgotten a long time." Sarah nodded. "We were looking for water before we set up camp. I should have been watching closer." He studied her for a moment. The fatigue, the bruises faintly visible near her wrist. The way she stood half-guarded even in gratitude. She was the kind of woman who had endured too much and expected no kindness in return. "You and the girl got somewhere to stay?" he asked finally. Sarah hesitated. "We're passing through, heading west." John glanced toward the darkening sky. "Not tonight, you're not? There's rain coming? Stay by my cabin till morning? Safer there." She looked uncertain, but Anna tugged her hand, whispering, "Please, Mama." And so, with dusk gathering, they followed him through the thinning fog. The trail wound past the ridge where the forest began to glow faintly orange under the sinking sun. John walked ahead, silent as the mountain itself, while Max kept pace beside the girl, occasionally nudging her hand as if guiding her steps. When they reached the cabin, a sturdy wooden home nestled between pines, smoke already curled from its chimney. John pushed open the door and stood aside. "You can rest here," he said. Sarah entered cautiously, eyes scanning the sparse interior: fireplace, worn table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with old tools and books. It was the kind of place that carried both order and loneliness. John poured water into a basin and set it before the child. "Wash the dirt off. There's bread on the counter." Anna smiled, whispering, "Thank you, Mr. John." He nodded once, removing his hat. Max lay down by the hearth, head resting on his paws, content. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. As night fell, Sarah sat near the fire, holding Anna close. John leaned against the doorway, watching the rain begin to fall beyond the porch. For the first time in years, the sound of another human breathing inside his home didn't make him uneasy. It made him remember something he'd long buried, what it felt like not to be alone. Rain hammered the roof through the night, the steady rhythm mingling with the crackle of the fire that still burned in the hearth. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and damp wool. John Miller sat in his worn chair near the window, his shadow long across the wooden floor. Outside, the forest whispered under the weight of the storm, and Max, his German shepherd, lay curled by the door, ears twitching with every rumble of thunder but never moving from his post. Inside, 2 strangers slept, the woman and her child, bundled beneath a blanket near the fire. Sarah Jennings had fallen asleep sitting up, her arm still draped protectively over Anna's shoulders. Her hair, a cascade of brown loosened from its braid, glinted faintly in the firelight. The harsh lines of exhaustion on her face had softened in sleep, but the faint purple marks around her wrist and the bruise fading along her jaw told the truth of her journey. She was a woman molded by endurance, tall, slender, but wiry, with the kind of quiet strength that grows only from surviving too much. When she stirred, her eyes fluttered open slowly, blue-gray and alert even before full consciousness returned. She looked around, momentarily disoriented, until she saw Max's calm gaze and the silhouette of the man who had saved her daughter. John turned slightly toward her. "You didn't sleep much?" he said. His voice was low, gravelly, yet without sharpness. "I'm not used to peace and quiet," Sarah murmured, pulling the blanket tighter around Anna. "When it's quiet, I keep waiting for something to go wrong." John said nothing, but his eyes softened. He poured water into a tin mug and handed it to her. "Coffee's boiling. Drink before it turns bitter." She took the mug carefully, fingers brushing his for the briefest moment. His hand was rough, calloused, the hand of a man who had known both labor and loss. "Thank you," she said, and her voice carried both gratitude and wariness. As morning light seeped through the small window, the rain thinned into mist. Anna woke, rubbing her eyes, her curls a wild halo. She smiled when she saw Max still guarding the door. "He didn't sleep either," she said, giggling softly. Max lifted his head, tail thumping once, as if confirming her observation. John's stern mouth twitched into what might have been a smile. "He's on duty," he said. "He takes that serious." After breakfast, simple bread, dried apples, and a few slices of venison from John's pantry, Sarah stood at the doorway, gazing out at the forest that surrounded the cabin. The mist hung low between the pines, giving everything a ghostly stillness. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. "It's quiet," John replied. "That's what I needed." Sarah hesitated before asking, "Why live so far from town? There are easier places to be." He shrugged, staring into his coffee. "People talk too much where it's easy." The conversation died there, but something unspoken passed between them. An understanding of two people who had both learned to hide from the world. By midday, the rain had stopped. John went outside to split firewood, and Anna followed, her small boots crunching on wet soil. "Can I help?" she asked, eyes wide. He looked down at her, the faintest hint of amusement in his gaze. "You can hand me the pieces I finish, but mind your fingers." She nodded seriously. Max stayed close by, watching her every move like a sentry. When John swung the axe, the wood cracked cleanly, echoing through the trees. Anna clapped once, delighted. "You're really strong, Mr. John." "Old," he corrected with a dry tone. "That's different." From the porch, Sarah watched the scene, her daughter laughing in a place that didn't echo with fear. For a long moment, her expression softened, then hardened again as memory returned. When John came inside later, wiping sweat from his brow, she finally spoke the words she'd been holding back since last night. "You should know," she said quietly. "If you let us stay, even for a day, there's a man who might come looking." John set the axe down and turned to her fully. "The girl's father?" She shook her head sharply. "No, my husband was a good man, a soldier. He died years ago. The one hunting us was supposed to protect me after. His name's Thomas Gray." She said the name like a curse. "He fought with my husband. When Samuel died, Thomas offered help. Food, shelter. I thought he was grieving too. But grief turned into something mean. He started calling me his. There were no vows, no papers, just his fists." Her voice trembled but did not break. "When I finally ran, he said he'd find us anywhere we went. I believe him." John studied her in silence, his jaw tightening. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. The bruise along her jaw and the fear beneath her calm told enough. "If he finds his way here," John said at last, "he'll have to get through me first." Sarah met his eyes and saw not a threat, but a promise. As dusk fell, the air turned cold again. John fixed the loose shutter and checked the traps he'd set near the edge of his land. Max followed him through the twilight, ears pricked, nose low. The sky was streaked with purple, the scent of wet pine sharp in the fading light. From the cabin window, Sarah watched the two figures move together, man and dog, steady and sure, both shaped by loyalty. That night, after Anna fell asleep, Sarah sat by the fire while John cleaned his rifle. The rhythm of his movements was methodical, almost meditative. "You were a soldier too, weren't you?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. Once. "War changes people." He paused, the cleaning cloth motionless in his hand. "Sometimes it just shows what was already there." For a while they sat in silence, except for the pop of pine sap in the flames. Then Sarah whispered, "I'm sorry if we brought trouble to your door." He glanced at her, his voice low. "You didn't bring trouble. You brought something this place hasn't had in a long time. Life." Her eyes glistened, catching the light. "You're kind," she said. He shook his head. "Just tired of ghosts." Outside, wind moved through the trees like a sigh. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, and John's gaze followed the window briefly before settling again on the fire. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt lived in. The laughter of a child still echoed faintly against the walls, and the smell of rain lingered in the wood. As Sarah leaned back, exhaustion finally pulling her toward rest, John remained awake, listening to the rain return. Max shifted closer to the fire, nose resting on his paws. The man and the dog shared a glance, quiet understanding passing between them. Both had spent too long guarding empty space. Now they guarded something worth keeping. When the last log fell to embers, John rose, checked the door latch, and stood for a long while, watching the sleeping forms of mother and child. The storm outside eased into a whisper. For the first time in years, John Miller didn't dread the coming dawn. He almost looked forward to it. The following week brought an uneasy calm to the ridge. Morning sunlight draped across the pines like a thin veil of gold, but John Miller felt the stillness differently. Too clean, too quiet, like the air before a storm. Sarah had settled into a fragile rhythm, cooking by the fire, mending Anna's clothes, and gathering herbs near the creek. The bruises on her skin had faded, though shadows still clung to her eyes. She smiled more now, but only when Anna was watching. John noticed the way her laughter always stopped halfway, as if she was afraid joy might call danger closer. John spent his days repairing fences and chopping wood, his broad shoulders glistening with sweat beneath the Montana sun. He had shaved his beard short, the gray more visible now against the dark stubble. His arms, corded with old scars, moved with precision, a man used to building and breaking in equal measure. Max followed him everywhere, his thick coat catching burrs from the underbrush, tail sweeping in slow, cautious arcs. The German shepherd was 6 years old, but carried himself with the patience of something older. He rarely barked. He didn't need to. His deep growls were warning enough. The townsfolk had begun to whisper about the woman and the child seen buying flour at the general store, with the quiet giant at her side. Bridger's Hollow was a small town. Rumors spread faster than rain on tin. Most were harmless. Stories of kindness or idle talk about how the war had left too many widows and too few men. But gossip had a way of finding the wrong ears. And in a tavern 50 miles south, it did. Thomas Gray leaned across a table, slick with spilled whiskey, his fingers tightening around a half-empty glass. He was a man of 40, once handsome but worn down by drink and bitterness. His hair, once chestnut, now hung in greasy strands streaked with gray. A jagged scar cut across his chin, a souvenir from a cavalry skirmish years before. He had been a soldier once, like John, though discipline had never suited him. War had given him purpose, but peace took it away. When the fighting ended, Thomas carried the battlefield home with him. Rage, pride, and a need to own something, someone. Across from him sat Roy Bender and Clem Harlow, two drifters with dust-caked boots and revolvers that looked more polished than their souls. Roy was a wiry man in his 30s, missing half an ear, with the nervous twitch of someone who talked too fast and thought too slow. Clem was heavier, bald on top with a patchy beard and a cruel mouth that smiled too easily. "You sure she's up there?" Roy asked, wiping whiskey from his chin. Thomas's lips curled into a thin grin. "The woman doesn't know how to hide. She thinks the mountains will protect her. But I know her smell, her habits. She'll go where she thinks nobody looks, and that's where I'll find her." He slammed back the drink, eyes glassy but sharp. "She belongs to me." The bartender, an old man with a crooked spine, pretended not to hear. By dusk, 3 horses left the tavern, heading north. Back on the ridge, John felt the shift in the wind before sunset. Max lifted his head from where he lay by the porch and let out a low, warning growl. John froze, listening. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a raven screamed once, then silence. He walked to the shed and opened the door, retrieving his rifle, an old Winchester polished from years of habit. Inside the cabin, Sarah was brushing Anna's hair by the fire. "Something wrong?" she asked when she saw his face. "Maybe," he said simply. "Keep the lamps low tonight." When the first hoofbeats echoed faintly through the forest hours later, John already had a plan. He moved with calm efficiency, checking the traps he'd laid months before for stray wolves, resetting 2 near the path that led to the cabin. Then he rolled back the old rug by the fireplace, revealing a wooden hatch. "Down there," he said. Sarah hesitated. "John, don't argue, take the girl." Anna clung to Max's neck, whispering, "Is it bad men?" John crouched and stroked the dog's head. "You stay with me, boy," he said softly. Max's ears perked. "Watch the door." Sarah descended into the dim root cellar, holding Anna close. John handed her a lantern and a rifle, his expression steady. "You don't open this hatch till I come back. Understand?" She nodded, her throat tight. "Be careful." He gave a brief nod, then closed the hatch and rolled the rug back into place. The cabin went dark except for the dying fire. Minutes later, voices broke the silence outside. Rough, careless laughter. Thomas Gray rode at the front, his black coat whipping in the cold wind. The 2 men behind him dismounted, rifles slung low. Thomas's voice carried through the night, drunk with fury and possession. "Sarah, you think you can run from me? You think some crippled soldier can hide you forever?" John stepped out from the shadows near the barn. "She's not yours," he said, voice even but edged like steel. Thomas squinted, then barked a harsh laugh. Well, the giant hermit himself. I heard about you. You got a death wish, mister?" "No," John said. "Just a promise to keep." The first man, Roy, raised his gun. A second later, a rope trap snapped from the tree line, yanking his legs out from under him. He fell hard, cursing as his rifle fired into the dirt. Clem lunged forward, but Max darted from the darkness, teeth flashing. The German shepherd struck his arm and brought him down, growling deep, the sound pure violence. Clem screamed, rolling away as Max bit again, unrelenting. Thomas fired once, the bullet grazing John's shoulder. John staggered, then steadied his aim and fired back. The shot caught Thomas's thigh, spinning him sideways. He fell with a howl, mud splattering his coat. Datyam Turtika, gunfire echoed off the ridges, scattering the birds from the trees. Then, silence, except for Max's low growl and Thomas's ragged breathing. John walked toward him, blood seeping through his sleeve. Thomas tried to raise his gun again, but John kicked it away, sending it spinning into the mud. "You don't have to die out here," John said. Thomas spat blood, sneering. "You think you're some kind of hero?" "No," John answered. "Just a man who's done running." Thomas lunged with a knife, but John moved first. A quick motion, one clean strike with the rifle's butt, and Thomas collapsed, unconscious. The forest fell quiet again. Max limped back to John's side, muzzle streaked with dirt. John knelt, pressing a hand to the dog's fur. "Good boy?" He looked toward the cabin. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. The air smelled of gunpowder and pine. He was bleeding, but he didn't care. When he opened the hatch, Sarah climbed out slowly, lantern trembling in her hand. Anna clung to her skirts. She saw the blood on John's sleeve, the exhaustion in his face. "You're hurt," she whispered, stepping closer. "Just a scratch," he said, though his voice weakened. She reached up, her hand trembling as it touched his arm. "You saved us," she said softly. Her eyes filled with tears, catching the flicker of the lantern light. John wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Instead, he sank into the chair near the hearth. Max lay at his feet, resting his head on one paw, eyes half closed but watchful still. Sarah knelt beside him, pressing a cloth to his wound. The storm outside had passed, but the cabin remained heavy with silence. For the first time since the war, John Miller bled for someone, and didn't regret it. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving behind a world washed clean but heavy with silence. Mist still clung to the valley, rising in thin ghosts from the wet ground. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, and the scent of pine sap drifted through the air. John Miller sat by the window, his left arm wrapped in a strip of linen Sarah had torn from her dress. The wound was shallow, but fatigue settled deep in his bones. Across the room, Sarah moved quietly, cleaning the blood from the floorboards. Her face was pale from sleeplessness, yet her movements were calm, precise, the kind of steadiness born from surviving too long on fear. Anna slept on the cot near the hearth, one small hand resting on Max's neck. The dog had been restless through the night, waking at every creak, his ears twitching toward the door as though danger might return. Now he slept lightly, his breath slow, his chest rising and falling against the flickering glow. Outside, the world was gray and still. A column of smoke curled from the chimney, the only sign of life in miles. John had already buried the 2 hired men in the woods before dawn, shallow graves beneath the birches. He had dragged Thomas Gray's unconscious body to the edge of the ridge and left him tied to his horse, sent down toward town with a note for the sheriff. He didn't kill if he could help it. Death, he believed, was something that clung to you, even when you tried to wash it away. When Sarah stirred from her chores, she looked toward him. The dim light caught her profile, the delicate lines of her cheekbone, the strength in her jaw, the faint scar near her temple that she'd never spoken of. "You should rest," she said softly. John didn't move. "I've rested enough for a lifetime." Her lips curved faintly, somewhere between amusement and sadness. "You've fought enough too." He didn't answer. His gaze had drifted toward the shelf across the room, to an old wooden box half hidden behind a stack of folded blankets. The box was small, square, carved from oak and blackened around the edges. It looked unremarkable, except for the way John's eyes lingered on it. When he stepped outside to fetch water, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She crossed the room and knelt before the shelf. The box was lighter than she expected, the lid held shut with a rusted clasp. For a long moment she hesitated. Something about it felt sacred, private. But when her hand brushed against it, a faint tremor passed through her fingers. Not fear, but recognition. The weight of memory. She opened it. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in faded linen. Beneath it, a photograph. Old, edges frayed, the image almost ghostly with age. A young woman smiled up from it, her face bright and unguarded, holding a child with wild curls. The boy couldn't have been older than 3. His small hands clutched a wooden horse. Both wore light summer clothes, sunlight spilling across their faces. It was a picture of joy untouched by time. Sarah's throat tightened. She lifted the photo carefully, tracing the outline of the woman's hair. Beneath it, folded paper, a letter, yellowed and brittle, written in looping cursive. The ink had bled in places, but she could still make out the words. My dearest John, if you read this, it means I did not make it out. Please don't let vengeance take you. Promise me you'll live, even if it hurts. Promise me you'll remember love more than loss. Sarah's eyes blurred with tears. The handwriting spoke of warmth, tenderness, the kind that made grief almost unbearable. She set the letter down gently just as the door opened behind her. John stood in the threshold, one hand braced on the frame. His clothes were damp, his expression unreadable. You shouldn't be looking in there. Sarah turned slowly, guilt flashing across her face. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. He closed the door behind him and walked over, his boots heavy on the floor. It's all right, he said finally, voice low. I suppose it was time someone else saw. She looked up at him. Your wife? He nodded once. Her name was Eliza, and the boy, Sam. His eyes softened as he spoke the names, as if saying them out loud returned them to life for a heartbeat. They died when the war was already over. Some soldiers, Union men, passed through the valley celebrating their victory. Drunk. One of them threw a lantern into a barn near the house. By the time I got there, his jaw tightened. There wasn't much left. Sarah's eyes filled again. I'm so sorry. He shook his head. It was a long time ago. I buried them by the river and walked away from everything. Army, friends, the town, just me and Max after that. The dog stirred at the mention of his name, tail thumping weakly before settling again. John crouched, running a rough hand over the dog's head. He was a pup then. Found him under a wagon 2 days later. I guess he decided I needed company. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. You never remarried? He gave a small, sad laugh. You think a man who lives with ghosts makes a good husband. You still save people, she said quietly. You saved me. You saved my daughter. John looked at her, really looked, at the lines beneath her eyes, the defiance that survived every bruise, the way she held herself even now, proud and unbroken. Maybe, he said softly. But you're the ones who reminded me there's still something worth saving. For a while they sat in silence, the fire crackling softly. Outside, the wind shifted through the pines, whispering low and mournful. Sarah closed the box and set it back on the shelf. You kept all this hidden because it hurt to look at it, she said, not accusing, just knowing. He nodded. Pain's easier when It's kept quiet. Maybe, she whispered, but it's lighter when it's shared. Their eyes met, and something fragile passed between them. Understanding, trust, the quiet beginning of something neither dared name. Anna stirred then, half awake, mumbling something about Max's tale. The moment broke softly. John rose, pulling the blanket higher over the child. She sleeps like my boy used to, he murmured. Sarah smiled faintly, tears glistening in the firelight. Then maybe he's watching over her. John didn't answer, but his hand rested gently on Anna's shoulder. For a man who had buried everything he loved, it felt almost like faith. When night came, the three of them sat together by the fire, Sarah mending a torn sleeve, Anna humming a song under her breath, John carving a piece of wood into a small horse. The air outside grew cold again, but inside, warmth filled the spaces between words left unsaid. For the first time since the fire that took his family, John Miller didn't feel haunted by ghosts. He felt accompanied by them. Winter gave its last breath slowly that year. The snow retreated from the ridges in shy streaks, revealing dark soil beneath, and the river swelled with meltwater that glimmered like steel under the morning sun. Birds returned first, finches and robins, chattering boldly as though they'd been gone only a day. The valley of Sable Ridge, once draped in silence and grief, began to breathe again. John Miller stood outside his rebuilt cabin, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his large hands stained with sawdust. The old structure that had once crouched beneath the pines now stood taller, its beams straight and strong, the windows broad to let the light in. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. The smell of fresh-cut pine lingered in the air, mingled with the faint sweetness of wild blossoms. He had built it with his own hands over the long winter, every board carved, every nail set in with purpose. The scars on his palms, faded but visible, were marks of rebirth more than pain now. Max padded beside him, coat gleaming in the spring sun. The German shepherd had healed from the fight months ago, though a faint scar still crossed his foreleg like a badge. At 7 years old, his muzzle had grayed just slightly, but his eyes still burned with the same amber fire. He trotted toward the pasture where the young mare grazed, tail wagging lazily, and barked once, just to make sure everyone knew the valley was his to guard. From the porch came laughter. Anna, now sturdier and sun-kissed after the long winter, ran barefoot through the grass, her curls bouncing wildly. She was chasing after the mare with Max in tow, the two of them weaving through the field like a pair of mischievous spirits. "Faster, Max!" she called, voice high and bright. The dog barked in agreement, though he slowed just enough to let her win. Sarah stood nearby, hanging freshly washed linens on a line strung between two birches. The wind caught the white fabric, turning it into sails that fluttered and danced. She wore a pale blue dress today, simple but graceful, her hair unpinned so that the sun caught strands of gold among the brown. Her cheeks held a healthy glow now, her figure less gaunt, her eyes softer. She moved with a calm confidence. The haunted watchfulness that once shadowed her had faded into something steadier, more at peace. John watched her for a moment before approaching, wiping his hands on a rag. "You've been up since dawn again," he said gently. Sarah smiled over her shoulder. Old habits. In the war, dawn meant safety. You could see what was coming. He nodded, stepping closer. "You still think something's coming?" Her eyes found his, bright under the wide sky. Maybe something good this time. They stood there in companionable silence. The valley spread wide before them, green and alive. It had taken months for Sarah and Anna to truly settle, months of storms, hard work, and quiet rebuilding. But the rhythm of life had returned. Every Sunday, they went to the small church in Bridger's Hollow, where old Mrs. Calloway, the preacher's wife, whispered that the hermit finally found his humanity. John only smiled and kept his hat low. In town, people had come to know him differently now. He delivered lumber for repairs after the thaw, fixed fences for neighbors, and helped dig a new well for the schoolhouse. Though he spoke little, his presence was steady, and respect followed him wherever he went. Children waved when they saw Max trotting beside the wagon. That afternoon, as sunlight turned the meadow to gold, Anna climbed onto the young mare, bareback. "Watch me, Mama," she called, holding the reins loosely as Max barked encouragement. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron, shading her eyes. "Careful." John stepped out from the porch, one hand resting on the post. "She's a natural," he said. "She's fearless," Sarah replied, half smiling. "Gets that from her rescuer." He chuckled quietly. "Or her mother." The wind shifted then, warm and sweet, carrying the scent of cedar and wildflowers. For the first time in years, John didn't hear ghosts in the rustle of the pines, only the living heartbeat of a home. Later, as the sun began to sink, Sarah set the table outside, a simple meal of bread, stew, and sweet apples. The three of them ate together on the porch, laughter mingling with the hum of crickets. Max lay sprawled beneath the table, occasionally nudging Anna's foot for scraps. She slipped him a piece of bread, whispering, "Don't tell Mama." After the meal, the sky deepened into shades of rose and copper. John leaned against the railing, arms folded. Sarah stood beside him, drying her hands on her apron. "You know," he said after a long pause, "I used to think I'd die alone out here. Thought that was the way things were meant to be." She looked up at him, the evening light catching in her eyes. "And now?" He took a slow breath, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Now I've got a reason to wake up before the sun. You and Anna, you gave me something I didn't think I'd ever have again. A home." Sarah's lips trembled into a smile, quiet but full of warmth. "You gave us the same." From the field, Anna's laughter rose again as she threw a stick for Max. The dog bounded after it, ears flying, and the two figures became silhouettes against the setting sun. John turned toward Sarah. "You ever think," he said softly, "that maybe some things aren't lost forever? Maybe they just come back. Different." She reached out, taking his hand. Different can still be good. For a long while they stood together watching the sky burn into gold, their hands clasped, their breaths slow and even. Behind them, the American flag John had found and cleaned months ago fluttered gently from its post, a symbol not of war this time, but of endurance. As twilight deepened, John called softly, "Come inside, Anna." "In a minute," the girl called back, still giggling as Max dropped the stick at her feet. Sarah smiled. "She's just like you, stubborn." He smiled back, his rough features softening. "Then she'll survive anything." When the first stars appeared, they finally gathered at the porch steps, man, woman, child, and dog, all facing the valley. The world around them glowed faintly with the promise of a new season. For once, no ghosts lingered, no fear crept at the edges of their peace. Just the sound of a child's laughter, a dog's steady breath, and the gentle wind that carried the scent of spring. John lifted his arm, resting it around Sarah's shoulders. "Feels like the start of something," he said quietly. She leaned into him, she whispered. It feels like home. The flag rippled softly in the evening breeze as the light faded, and Sable Valley held its peace. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright lights from the sky. They come quietly, through the warmth of a hand that helps you up, through the laughter of a child, through the loyal eyes of a dog who refuses to leave your side. For John, Sarah, Anna, and faithful Max, the miracle was not in escaping the storm, but in finding peace after it. Proof that even the most broken hearts can be mended by love, faith, and the gentle grace of God. When we look around our own lives, we might see the same kind of quiet miracles every day. A friend who stays when others leave, a stranger who smiles at just the right time, a moment of peace after long nights of worry. These aren't coincidences. They're God's reminders that He still walks among us, often through the kindness of ordinary people. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the blessings in your own life. Maybe, like John, you've carried pain for too long. Maybe, like Sarah, you've fought battles no one saw. Or maybe, like Anna, you still believe the world can be kind. Hold on to that faith, because even in the darkest valleys, God's light never truly fades. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He remind you that love, courage, and hope are the truest miracles of all. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Like the video to spread its message of faith and healing, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories where God's grace shines through ordinary lives. May God bless you, your family, and every heart that still believes in small miracles.